Hello and welcome to this first time Hiscurious live stream. Today I'm here with one of my friends named Yukubos.
Hello, good evening. I'm glad and I am honored to be part of the very first Hiscurious live stream, and to be a guest here.
All right, so today we are going to be looking into, quite a interesting topic, and that topic is going to be something we don't get to talk about too often: Soviet nuclear incompetence. And what do I mean with that? Chernobyl. So, yeah, what was Chernobyl actually?
Yeah, so Chernobyl, in the very first place, was a 20th century's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, nuclear disasters, right? In the whole world, that took place in the Soviet Union. I believe it was in 1986, to be completely specific, right?
Uh, I
Uh,
believe so.
yes, but it was definitely in the second part of the 1980s, um, and it did influence not only the Soviet Union itself, but um, the impact was felt also in the Western states as well, Western countries as well, throughout the whole Western Europe, and a couple of days later, news reached the whole world.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that Chernobyl's actually one of the leading factors in the dissolution of the USSR because
As well.
the secrecy behind it was kind of insane, especially compared to what we see, in the modern day, or even back then, just 14 years before, 2000. So, quite a revolutionary event, actually. So, I think we should start off with a common misconception. The Slavs are too stupid to boil water. Yeah.
Dot.
Yeah, I think this is a.
I think I truly believe this statement sums up the whole situation pretty well.
Yeah, honestly, you can't argue with this because at the end of the day, it was a bunch of Slavs trying to boil water, and they didn't read the instruction manual properly.
Yes, and it caused this devastating disaster.
Yeah, and it's also tainted the world's the reputation of nuclear energy in the modern day.
Yes.
It's kind of a
Yeah. I think that if this thing didn't happen, that there would be indeed more countries using nuclear energy as their one of the main sources of energy, right?
yeah.
Though it is still a highly dangerous way of um, obtaining energy, and
Yeah, like we just have to look at France. It's one of the few countries that has fully endorsed nuclear energy. And if you also look at some other countries, nuclear energy is relatively safe. But if we look at what happened in Japan, for example,
2011
yeah,
Fukushima disaster.
yeah, that they're all the safety measures they were followed and all precautions were taken, but it still backfired. So there are certain risks to it, but in general, it's actually quite safe. And that Slavs are too stupid to boil water.
Well,
That's probably not true because it happened once, and it was also a series of silly little events.
yeah,
So yeah, these are the names of the bad luck having folks that were
which
in Chernobyl at the time. Several of them. Of course, it's more than just these three, but these are probably the ones that are largely responsible, and that it came down to them whether or not the Chernobyl disaster would happen. So we have Viktor
Burkhanov.
Bryukhanov, Anatoly
Dyatlov.
and Leonid Toptunov.
Yes.
And yeah, these guys must have had the worst fucking day coming into work.
Yeah, they definitely stepped out of their bed with the wrong leg, right?
Yeah, man, bad luck all around, and also some of that Soviet guilt tripping and desire to seek a promotion just by doing some insanity. Keep it silent, keep it to yourself, and hope for the best. So one of the main figures that you would also probably have seen in HBO's Chernobyl series is Viktor Burukhanov. He was the director, and at the end of the day, when there were court hearings, he was the one that had some tough luck and a lot of explaining to do, because turns out he was the one that kind of pushed Anatoly and Leonid to go on with these experiments. And of course there was a smaller crew of others within the facility, but Anatoly, the chief engineer, he was the one that had to look into the practicalities. And of course then there's Leonid, who was in control of the reactor. Essentially, he was the chief overseer, and he saw that some things were going whack, but by the time he realized it was a little too late, and the chief engineer couldn't do much except kind of cry. It's a really doomerish moment in the history, and as well as that, in Ukrainian history and the history of Belarus. We cannot just exclude them. They also had an important part, because that's the first measuring the first radioactive waste was measured, I believe, in Minsk's laboratories or something like this.
I'm not really sure about that, but that might be the case. They were actively examining that those things there, and as we know even today, Belarus still has a couple of nuclear plants, or is it
they still
only
have
the one?
several nuclear reactors, but that's fine. The problem lies with the fact that I'm pretty sure that Belarus is one of the few countries that has a remaining nuclear reactor of the same build type as the one that
Chernobyl's, right?
Yeah.
Chernobyl's model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these men got put in a bad position. It was kind of like putting ice in a deep fryer. What I mean to say is, once you dip it in, it's only getting worse. So essentially, what happened was a nuclear meltdown, and what that entails is that the fusion rods, they essentially overheated, and then due to the pressure buildup within the, I guess what you call it, the main compartment, which is covered by a bunch of kind of lead bricks or rods, the pressure built up, and then it just blew up due to all the steam buildup. And once it blew up, it was already too late, because it was not just a meltdown anymore. It was the first time that there was an actual explosive reaction, and it was not a nuclear explosion. That's a misconception a lot of people have, that it was a nuclear blast.
Yeah, if it was the case, I don't think these lands would be present.
Yeah,
right,
because the complex in Pripyat, and well, by extent Chernobyl, it exists, I believe, out of 4 reactors, of which one exploded.
Yeah.
And this is kind of, well, if it was a nuclear explosion, I can tell you those other ones would not be standing.
Yes.
And they would not be operational in the same way that they are currently and were in the past as well. Yeah.
Ooh.
So over here we have a map of Ukraine, just so you guys understand roughly where this exclusion zone is in these days. It runs through this portion of Belarus here, and then up until here. The Kiev Reservoir is also quite close to it, and one of the big fears was that with the explosion, if the runaway water, which was used to cool down, leaked into the Pripyat River, it would enter the Dnipro River and then poison essentially all of central Ukraine's
Water
land,
supplies.
yeah, water supplies, but also agricultural land for hundreds of years. And if we look at it, yeah, it's circled right there. That's the most important region. Kiev became a ghost town once the explosion happened. Some of our or my friends who live there explained that when Chernobyl happened, a lot of people left Kiev once it became public within the USSR. However, fun fact is, under Gorbachev's rule, they still allowed parades to happen in Kiev.
Inside Kiev. Wow.
Yeah, during the initial phase of trying to cover up the disaster, which led to a lot of unneeded contamination, and well, till this day, you still see that people that were exposed to these higher amounts of radiation, even though it was very moderate in Kiev due to the direction of the wind, there's still higher risks of cancer and birth deformities amongst children, and leukemia, especially leukemia amongst children. So that's quite a shocking little revelation. As we just said, Gorbachev also did his best at covering it up.
Yeah, he tried. But in the end, we all know what all these events led to in 1991 eventually. Of course, with contribution of other events, not only this Chernobyl disaster, but it definitely was that. How do I put it? Well, it definitely contributed to the basically the dissolution of Soviet Union. Because it influenced the Soviet Union's economy, or also social life, right? And in the end, people in the West and in the rest of the world realized that Soviet Union is not the safest place, and not the idealist place to live in. Of course, they already knew that before. Those more educated ones. The ones who were not as influenced by propaganda and all stuff like that. But this just also proved that they are in a very tough position. They're in a very tough position.
Yeah, I also just wanted to quickly touch on the fact that perestroika and glasnost, they were policies introduced by Gorbachev, yet going against everything that he kind of stood for with the perestroika and glasnost. He still tried to cover it up to his best, and he went to this idea of "nie boltaj," don't speak, keep quiet, keep it to yourself type attitude, something that would be typical for, post-Stalinist leaders who were trying to erase Stalin's legacy, but also Stalin himself. So it's something that really was ingrained within the Soviets' mentality. And I think that this is one of the big reasons for the Soviet Union's dissolution later on. The idea that you can't trust the leader anymore, the chairman of the Soviet Union, or well, the USSR in this case, to keep his word. And yeah, that was really revolutionary at the time, as in revolutionary as in it caused problems for the people. Now, why do we have Swedish cock on the screen? Because the Swedes were the first ones to actively yell to the world, we got some radiation in our land and it's not sitting well. You know, Cockboy in Sweden was not happy. And the world caught on and started putting pressure on Gorbachev, asking, well, why do we have radiation going through Europe? Why is our night sky a little tinted? What's going on, Mr. Gorbachev? Are you hiding something? And the answer was firstly a resounding yeah. No, nothing's going on. But after a little bit more prodding, you know, it's kind of hard to deny radiation poisoning amongst another country's civilians. So, yeah, following the Swedish cuckboy, the rest of the world decided to call out the USSR and said, well, if you guys need some support, just let us know.
Yeah.
Well, of course, Mr. Gorbachev never needs help. The Soviet Union is strong. The USSR, we don't need anyone. We got Tula. Great place. Who doesn't love Tula? Tula is a little mining city that's about 200-ish, 300-ish kilometers away from Moscow. And, well, during the USSR, they decided to take the coal miners from Tula to dig underneath Chernobyl to help create an installation that will prevent water, the drainage water, from seeping into the ground and then into the Pripyat River. And yeah, it was a tough task to stop this from happening. And what's even more confusing is you have Donetsk, and yeah, it's a little too long. But what's weird is that for once during the Soviet Union, they threw in working class Russians to clean up this problem, and this might have to do with the fact that they did not want this to spread as a disaster caused by the USSR through the Ukrainian SR, more specifically, even though there were some ideas of, oh, well, we might be one as a country or a union, so to say. There were already independence movements going on throughout Belarus, Poland, the Baltics, and this could have been a tipping point, so it was quite smart not to send them from Donetsk. But instead, they got the loyals from Tula to go over there. And yeah, that's where we really started seeing the first actual preventative steps from being taken by preventing water from draining into the Dnipro and then poisoning the rest of Ukraine and also the Black Sea, which, well, is connected to the Mediterranean, which would have been a bad time for a lot of people. So commendable, but still, you know, just a lot of mismanagement that led to this point. Essentially, the miners in Tula are kind of like Zoolander. They were swagged out. They were digging all day, sweaty. It was a tough job, and a lot of them also were affected by the tough conditions. Not only were you put into barracks around a radioactive hotspot, you were put in the most miserable conditions with a task of essentially saving over 60 million people, because you also got to consider the neighboring regions.
the neighboring and the ones which are connected not to the Black Sea. Let's keep in mind, but also to the Mediterranean, right?
Yeah, but the Mediterranean would not have been affected as much as the Black Sea, but you need to keep in mind the food production in Ukraine was one of the most important parts
Yes.
of its entire industry, and if that was destroyed, we could have probably seen some starvation happen. It would have caused the dissolution even quicker. So it wasn't even really a matter of choice. It's more that if we don't, there's no self-preservation intact. Anyway, we fast forward into a bit more contemporary stuff because that's where a lot of my interest lies specifically. You'll see that in the later stages, after the situation at Chernobyl itself was stabilized, the Soviet Union threw a fucking sarcophagus over the entire reactor made out of concrete. However, it being the Soviet Union, it started developing cracks rather quickly. And there were already radiation leaks after about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, Ukraine became independent. And they decided that we need to call in the Dutch. And it's really weird because typically when you think of the Netherlands, you think of, water management. Yeah.
I mean, the Netherlands now have one of the cleanest waters. Yeah, in general, right? And I think they're really good at providing clean and very drinkable water for everyone.
Yeah. However, what did the Dutch do? They built the modern sarcophagus that covers up the reactor. It took a while, and it's actually one of the, I don't think it's the largest moving object, but it was definitely one of them. This entire new sarcophagus was moved on these rails that you can see here at the bottom and slid over the old reactor to deal with that crappy sarcophagus not working. And as you can see, this is not a construction that just happens in a day. There's an active community, at least prior to 2022, there was an active community of engineers, construction workers, and researchers, all based within the outskirts of Pripyat, where radiation levels were still manageable. And this was largely due to the significance of understanding radiation's effect on the wildlife, but also because if no one's going to build a new sarcophagus, you're just going to continue having the same issue of radiation leaking. Because it should not be understated that if you have, Chernobyl happened a while ago, but there's still radiation being output from Chernobyl itself, and not necessarily dust particles and stuff that you get from fires that continue burning, but just in general, it's still heavily irradiated, and it's better to just cover that up rather than having it go. And of course, in February 2022, you got your average Russian Ivan who decided to make a little trip across the border from Belarus into Ukraine. And one of the first pit stops was Chernobyl. Now, that's not great, because what did they do? They started digging through contaminated forests, digging up dirt, and apparently in the early stages of the war, quite a bit of people got radiation poisoning, or quite a bit of Russian soldiers got radiation poisoning and had to be transferred to the Minsk Radiological Institute to be treated, which once again shows the incompetence, because I'm not sure what type of commander or sergeant you have that tells you, go dig a trench in the radioactive ground. just because.
That the commander definitely didn't watch Hiscurious videos, right? To find out what happened in the in 1980s in the Chernobyl, right?
Yeah.
He definitely skipped that. He definitely wasn't a historian.
He was probably drinking
Yeah.
and then got confused.
Yeah.
Then following the takeover, we saw the Battle of Kiev happening and in the Kiev region, and this was quite a brutal point in the war. It was very uncertain for a lot of people. However, the Ukrainians managed to persevere and send a lot of the Russians back in codename 200, aka Dead Body Truck. And this was a disaster. So of course you have the liberation of Bucha and Irpin, and then the general withdrawal of Russian forces from Kiev region, just because it was unobtainable to capture Kiev. It was not realistic. It did take 2 months, but in these 2 months, it became clear that this war is not going to be over quickly. And the Russians ended up withdrawing from Chernobyl. Of course, not just leaving it clean, but actually having it, pillaging even more of what was already messed up. And of course, terrorizing the several residents that stayed in Chernobyl, including the workers at the other nuclear reactors, which were all captured and put under pretty atrocious circumstances.
Yes.
But aside from that, they dug some trenches, got radiation poisoning, and fucked right off. So Chernobyl is back to how it was, with one exception. You cannot go there unless you have a press pass given by the military. And for many reasons, that's a smart idea. Keep in mind, it's very close to the Belarusian border, with one of the entry points, and there's still risk of mines being laid around. After all, it was one of the big touristic drivers for many people to come to Ukraine. So if it gets knocked out, the chances are not that big that as many tourists will go. Of course, there's always war tourists and disaster tourists. They'll still happily visit, but the average Joe who's in Ukraine says, I want to see something more than Kiev, is going to have a bit of a mixed reception to this. Now, what is the future of Chernobyl? I think that considering everything, at least until the war's over in Ukraine, with a Ukrainian victory, hopefully, Chernobyl is going to be a restricted zone, no tourists, and on top of that, I think that there's going to be a new exhibition added, one about the war, because it was one of the entry points. It's a place where abuses came to light, and it was also one of the first cases where we could see energy blackmail and also nuclear blackmail being used. So I think that's quite a relevant part. And furthermore, Chernobyl just has another layer of history. No one thought that there would be gunfights in Chernobyl, and
Definitely.
it feels like it was a remake of Stalker, especially with the new Stalker game coming out soon.
Yeah, but that's war, and one thing that is also very interesting, and what we can also discuss, is that Chernobyl, the whole area of Chernobyl, kind of serves like especially from the north side of Ukraine, like a shield for Ukraine from Russia, from Russian soldiers,
And
right?
Belarusians.
And Belarusian soldiers,
The
right?
shield didn't work that well though.
But we still can consider those a couple of hundred cases when the Russian soldiers got the radiation poisoning, right?
Yeah, but it wasn't much of a deterrent. All I do know is that in the future, I think they're definitely going to invest in the region as well, considering it had one of the few roads that was accessible.
Oh yeah,
So,
no, yeah. I also think that they are gonna take good care of Chernobyl after the war is over. Of course, I'm not sure if it's gonna be the very first priority. Um, yeah, far from the first ones, but it will be taken a good care of. Yes,
yeah.
and who knows? Maybe we will again be able to go there freely and as tourists
Yeah.
and check it out. Um, um,
Yeah. All right. Thank you for watching this first live stream. If you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. And we will be back to you in about a week's time.